Thank you. The hearing will please come to order. Good morning. I'm John Galt, the Lake Forest Park hearing examiner. It's now a minute or two after 10 a.m. on February 20, 2025. Welcome to today's open record hearing. We have one item on our docket today. It's an application by the Lake Forest Park Civic Club for a maintenance dredge operation at its existing boat ramp in Lake Washington. The file number is 2024-SSD-0001. There's a fairly standard sequence of events that occurs in my hearings, and that sequence goes like this in case you've never been to one before. At the conclusion of my introductory comments, we'll begin the real guts of the hearing by first hearing direct testimony, and then an opportunity for rebuttal testimony, and then the hearing concludes with optional closing statements. Now, the direct testimony and the rebuttal testimony are heard in the same order, which is that our applicant goes first, followed by city planning staff, followed by any members of the public who wish to testify. Then when we get to closing statements, they are optional. So if you think you've said everything you need to, all you need to do is say no thank you when I ask if you want to make one. Closing statements are available first to city planning staff and second and last to the applicant. You'll notice in that sequence that our applicant speaks first and at least has the opportunity to be the concluding speaker as well. That's appropriate because the applicant bears the burden of proof. What that means quite simply is that it's up to the applicant to show by a preponderance of the evidence in the record that it meets the criteria for approval of a shoreline conditional use permit. Based on the criteria that are contained in the city's master program at section 3.8.b, as in Bravo. The applicant can meet that burden through testimony, through documents that become part of the record, or any combination of the both. A shoreline conditional use permit is classified by the city as a type 1 land use application. Type 1 applications require an open record hearing before the examiner, which is what we're here to do today. I then have up to 10 days after the close of the hearing in which to consider all of the testimony and the evidence that is offered and to reach and issue a decision. My decision will be a final decision for the city. Normally, it would be final subject to the right of appeal to Superior Court. However, the state legislature, in setting up the Shoreline Management Act, made conditional use permit decisions made by local governments. Essentially, the state would look at it as a recommendation to the Department of Ecology. I look at it as the city's final decision subject to review and action by ecology. Whichever way you look at it, we are not the final decision maker on this application. Rather, the city will send my decision on to the Department of Ecology. It makes a decision, and then its decision is subject to appeal to the State Shorelines Hearings Board. And if it goes that far, the Shorelines Hearings Board's decision is subject to appeal to Superior Court. Also tucked in that process, which I don't think I mentioned, is that my decision is subject to the right of reconsideration. There'll be a couple of paragraphs near the end of the decision that will explain the process in brief for reconsideration and that review onto ecology. And since that'll be in the written decision, I won't bore us this morning by going over that material. Once I have done my deliberation and prepared my decision, I send it electronically to the city, and the city then sends it out to all persons who are parties of record. In the old days, that distribution was all done by mail. Nowadays, most cities find that it's easier for them and more convenient for the public to get decisions electronically, sent as an attachment, usually to an email. Everybody who testifies in our hearing today is called a party of record. Parties of record are entitled to get a copy of the decision. If you want to be a party of record, or if you testify, either one, at the end of the hearing, I will close the recording. I will leave the hearing, but I will leave it going so that you folks can still be together. And then you can communicate with the city staff to make sure that staff has your contact information. And if you're willing to accept materials electronically, just give them your email address. If that's not convenient for you, or you just would rather have a piece of paper, let them know your postal mailing address. I'm required to base my decision primarily on the review criteria for shoreline conditional use permits, the reference to which I've already cited. And in addition to that, I will consider any other relevant provisions and requirements of the city code, of state rules and regulations and state statutes, all applied to the facts that are disclosed by the documents and the testimony entered into the hearing. I do reserve the right to take official notice of applicable state law, case law, regulations, city code provisions, etc. When it comes time for testimony, this is a hybrid hearing, so there may be some folks in city council chambers participating with us. Just before we started, I was informed by the city clerk, who is in the council chambers, excuse me, that nobody was there with him at that point. But when it comes time for public testimony, I'll ask the city clerk if there's anybody there then who wishes to testify. If they do, my understanding is that he has a way that they can come forward and have a computer or some arrangement for them to testify. We'll do them first, and then I will ask those who are here on the screen with me remotely if any of you wish to offer testimony. If you do, you can just wave your hand at me. I know there's a thing called raise your hand on the Zoom system. Unfortunately, I tend to pay more attention to the person that's talking than to little things popping up in the corner of the thumbnail pictures. So I'd rather see your hand wave than the little yellow hand go up in the corner. Once you've been recognized to speak, I'll raise my right hand. I'll ask you to raise yours. I'll administer the oath. You'll respond. After you've responded, I will ask you to tell us your name first and last and spell both. Now, sometimes people wonder, well, why do we have to do that? Because our names are on our little thumbnail pictures on the screen. And my explanation is simply that this recording can be reviewed either as an integrated audio-visual recording, or it can be listened to just simply as an audio recording. And I think, frankly, most times courts, if it ever gets that far, just like to listen to the audio and not watch the video. That being the case, they won't see your little thumbnail picture and they won't see how to spell your name. So that's why I ask you to do it for us. Once you've spelled your name, then you may just go ahead and begin your testimony. I typically will say something like, thank you very much, proceed. If I don't happen to say that to you and a few seconds of dead silence go by, just go ahead and start your comments. Are there any questions regarding hearing procedures? No? Are there any objections on jurisdictional grounds or concerns regarding conflict of interest? Hearing none, we will move right along. The city has gone through the materials that have been generated during its review of this application, and they have identified 11 of those items that staff believes will have either procedural and or substantive value to me as the decision maker. They've marked those as exhibits 1 through 11. Those exhibits have been available for public review and inspection in the city's online web system. And I have been provided with a link to all of them, and I have reviewed them. I herewith enter into the record pre-filed exhibits 1 through 11. City code says that I can make a site visit prior to entertaining a hearing like this. In the old days, I used to do personal site visits, usually just before the hearing, so it made a very efficient trip. Ever since we started doing hybrid and remote hearings, I find that the notion of driving someplace for about a 5-minute site visit and then driving all the way back to my home isn't a very efficient use of my time, so I avail myself of Google Earth imagery. Not that it's particularly germane, but I was trained in aerial imagery interpretation by the Army many decades ago and spent my career in the Army doing that work, at least for part of that career. So I'm pretty good at looking at aerial photos and figuring out what I'm looking at. He did that in this case. And the Google imagery that I had, I usually look at both overhead and street view. Having been in this area many times before, I realized that street view imagery was not even going to let me see the shoreline because it's so far away from where the nearest public street is. So I didn't waste my time on street view, but the overhead imagery was captured on August the 24th of 2022. So it's a fairly recent image of the area. Let's see. I think that's all the preliminaries that we need to go through. I don't know who's going to be the lead spokesperson for our applicant. Would that person wave their hand at me? Okay. Raise your right hand, please, sir. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be offering in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. And would you tell us your name and how to spell it, first and last?
Sure. It's Chris Czeisla, C-H-R-I-S, Czeisla, C-Z-I-E-S-L-A.
Thank you, Mr. Czeisla. Go ahead.
Yeah, so first off, thank you very much, Mr. Hearing Examiner, and thank you, Mr. Hoffman and Mr. Greedham for reviewing our application. It's fairly straightforward, as you indicated, where the Civic Club is requesting to dredge between 20 and 30 cubic yards of material that's been accumulating on their concrete and gravel boat launch. The boat launch has been in existence for quite some time. I think others will speak to that. But periodically, material does accumulate. This is mostly material that's either organic in nature, so milfoil, et cetera, or some of the sands that shift with boat wake and wind wave action along the shoreline. The material will be removed via an excavator from land and then disposed of at an appropriate upland facility. BMP's best management practices will be deploying a turbidity curtain around the area prior to any of the work and ensuring that all silt and turbidity has settled prior to removal of that turbidity curtain. The habitat value of the area, being an active boat launch, is limited in that it is, as I mentioned, fine organic material and sands that are recently accumulated versus long-term, biological areas. The removal process itself is expected to be completed in several hours, less than a day of work. It's a relatively small amount of material. Ideally, there'd be much more to be removed, but that's a more difficult problem. And so this is to provide improvements to the boat launching ability of the area. So this is the kind of the smallest amount that minimized the amount of material that we would remove to make that operable and to kind of restore it towards its previous condition when it was initially constructed. So that is about all I have to provide about the project itself. The staff report goes into the details we've provided, and I don't have the exhibit numbers in front of me, but we have provided a rationale for how we do meet with the relevant code sections. And so those pieces I would refer you to with respect to any questions about the project that as it relates to the compliance with the city code. But I'm happy to answer questions as well at any point on this. And I believe Eric Lawson may speak a little bit as well, but that's all I have for you unless you have any questions.
I think only one question at this point, and that is, you mentioned the staff report, and the way you mentioned it sounds like you've received it and had a chance to read it. A two-part question. Is there anything in the analysis portion of that report with which you disagree or think something's not quite right? And the second part, page 12 of that report contains a list of 9 recommended conditions. Is there anything about the recommended conditions that the applicant wishes to take concern with?
No, I have reviewed the staff report and the analysis and did not have concerns with that. And similarly, we reviewed the conditions, the recommended conditions. I reviewed them and others at the club reviewed them and are willing to abide by those conditions. We wanted to make sure that they were all doable and they seem reasonable. And actually, a lot of them are part of what we proposed as part of the project originally.
Thank you, Mr. Czeisla. Now, you said you may have some other persons involved in the application that might wish to testify as well. It would be appropriate for them to testify now during direct. You want to call on anybody?
Yes, maybe Eric could give it a little, Eric Lawson could give an overview of the club and the part of the reason for the project itself.
Okay. Mr. Lawson, if you're willing to testify, let's see, there you are. I've got 2 screen images that say Eric Lawson and different people. Each of them.
I'm the real Eric Lawson. Please stand up.
Okay. You swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be offering in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And would you tell us your name and how to spell it for the record?
Certainly. It's Eric Lawson, E-R-I-K. Last name Lawson, L-A-W-S-O-N.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Go ahead.
Thank you. And I thank you for your time and everybody else's today here. To just provide the narrative that goes with why we're here. Lake Forest Park Civic Club is a bathing and boating community. I'm part of the stakeholder group that serves as the board president currently. And our initiative is to maintain the substrate concrete surrounding areas for the recreational use of swimming and for boating. Over the years, we've been developing sediment that makes it inadequate for that use through various means, partly from some of the flood mitigation that was done and partly from other just weather circumstances have caused this activity to happen. So we're here basically to get that area restored to where it once was so that we can maintain, which is part of our job, the integrity of the area and for the community and those that use it.
Mr. Lawson, were you involved with the club back in, say, in or around 2016?
As a member only.
Member only. Do you recall at that time that the club came to the city and asked for a very similar permit to do the same thing, clean the sediment off the boat launch, and that I granted it that year?
Yes, sir, I'm aware. Thank you.
Okay. And is my impression, having gone back to refresh my memory about what was said in that hearing, is that this is sort of like a redo because it's silted back in over the last, 9 years or so. Is that sort of where we're at?
Yes, sir, that would be accurate.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Czeisla, is there anybody else in the applicants group that you would like to have testify?
I'll ask that Kip Kane may want to talk a little bit about the logistics of the removal itself. He's
Okay. Mr. Kane, are you willing to do that?
I am.
I'm not sure whether this has been pre-organized or whether you guys are hearing this for the first time that somebody wants you to testify.
Yeah, I'm just hearing it, but it's, if you had any questions about the actual physical aspect that Chris went over earlier, I'm more than willing to answer or testify to that fact.
Actually, I'm not sure that I do have any questions.
Okay.
The written materials seem pretty straightforward. It's going to be done by probably a track hoe or a front end loader of one type or another, with the loader body situated on the upland portion of the boat ramp and just a long arm going out and dragging the material in. And I recall the written materials said that there would probably be a dumpster type bin there and the materials would be dropped in there, allowed to dewater and then trucked off site.
Correct. That's exactly what I would testify to. So,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
I won't make you get sworn in then.
All right.
Does that conclude it, Mr. Czeisla, for the applicant?
Yes, it does.
It does. Okay. And the city is going to be where he is, right in the middle of my screen. Raise your right hand, please, sir. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be offering in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Go ahead. Tell us your name first and then go ahead and spell it and proceed.
Hi, good morning. I'm David Greetham, temporary senior planner with the city. The name is spelled David, D-A-V-I-D. Last name Greetham, G-R-E-E-T-H-A-M.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. You've seen our staff recommendation for approval with 9 conditions as you've referenced previously. I don't have much to add to the staff report, but I may muddy the waters a bit. I want to, pardon the pun, well, pun intended. I want to explain a little bit about the consolidated review process we've done here, just to make sure it's on the record. I think it could be more clear. This also has a tailing along with it, a shoreline exemption from substantial development. And that's as you probably know, it's exempted from the procedures of the shoreline substantial development permit because that has a repair and maintenance exemption. But we wanted to make sure we documented that. So we consolidated the review through both the notice of application and the hearing notice and the staff report. That's why the staff report references the exemption. And it's a little murky maybe because it's a pretty straightforward exemption. It meets the exemption for repair and maintenance, but it is, as we explain on page 5 and 6 of the staff report, also a conditional use because dredging is considered a conditional use in the Shoreline Master Program. So that's where the CUP comes in, is that dredging is that trigger for the CUP. So we know that a project can have both an exemption and a conditional use or a variance, and this is one of those cases. So we just wanted to make sure and document that.
You've frozen. Nobody else is frozen, but
Yeah,
Mr. Greetham, if you can hear us, you're frozen.
And if needed and he doesn't come back, I could finish that testimony for the city.
What he may have to do is log out and log back in again. Mr. Hoffman, if you want to finish it, just for expediency purposes, let me swear you in. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you'll be offering in this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, sir.
And tell us your name, how to spell it, and go ahead then.
Mark Hoffman, Community Development Director at City of Lake Forest Park. My name is spelled M-A-R-K-H-O-F-M-A-N.
Back.
Yeah, he's back.
Apologies, I froze right in the middle.
That's okay. Will you yield, Mr. Hoffman?
Pardon?
I was asking Mr. Hoffman if he'll yield. He had volunteered to
okay.
finish your
If I
statement.
could make one point.
Sure.
since I'm sworn in, and then give it back to David. The adopted shoreline master program requires compliance with all sections and regulations. And to be thorough, we thought the exemption should be merged with the type 1 conditional use permit. And the conditional use permit for dredging is required under the shoreline modifications chapter. So we thought it was a more full narrative to include all that background to create more certainty for the public review.
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Mr. Greetham.
That was a perfect conclusion to what I was saying. And so the only other, in case I freeze again, I only have one more comment to add, and that is that we did not receive any general public comments, but received comments from Duwamish Tribe and Ecology. And you'll note in the staff report that we responded to the Duwamish Tribe's comment by adding a condition on inadvertent discovery, condition 4. And we also followed up to let them know we're proceeding that way. And then the applicant provided a response to Ecology by fleshing out their the CUP criteria, and that's contained in Exhibit 10. And so we circle back with Ecology, and Ecology, who will also, of course, as you've mentioned, review this eventually if it moves forward. Ecology seems satisfied with that response at this point in time. So with that, I don't really have anything else to add that's not in the staff report, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay. One question. We have, I believe, in Lake Forest Park, the 120-day processing timeline. Am I right? Decisions are issued.
You are correct, but there is a recent bill in the legislature that divided the types into 3 categories. So this type 1 is actually 145 days now. The more ministerial went to 60 days, and then the mids went to 90, and then for some reason for type 1s with hearings, it was extended to 145. That's been codified, or that's been adopted by ordinance by the city council, but it has not made it to our municipal code codifier as yet.
Okay. Are we meeting the 100? It's what now, 145? Did you say?
Correct, yes. And so for the conditional use permit, we are. There was a lengthy period where staff was new, learning the SMP, doing the comprehensive plan, exploring repair and maintenance under an exemption. Then it was determined a conditional use permit would be required to meet the shoreline modifications. And so we're meeting that timeline.
Or we are within 145 days?
Yes, I believe the application date for the conditional use permit is in the exhibits.
And I'll add to that. And again, apologize for my connection going in and out here. Yeah, the 2 exhibits, the first one has a July date stamp, and that was the initial exemption request.
Yes.
And the second one does not have the date on it. And I'll apologize for that, but that came in mid-September. And the reason is, and this is just a procedural issue I had when I was putting the exhibits together, we had just had a permit coordinator leave, so I could not locate the original stamp version. So I got the clean version from the applicant to show, but I am aware of the timeline it came in by the email I got from the permit coordinator. So that was in September.
Yeah, the report says September 20th.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that. And so there was that gap that Mr. Hoffman mentioned between the initial and second applications, the second one being the CUP.
And are we within, I'm not good at counting days on my fingers. Are we within 145 days of September 20? And did the clock stop at any time during that? I'm vaguely aware of this new state law. This is the first time it's ever popped up in one of my hearings, interestingly. The state is blessing us with all kinds of new fun things these days. So I'm assuming that the new state law still has the timeouts, if you will, within the 145 days. If additional materials requested, the clock stops until it's submitted, that kind of stuff. I'm assuming that's still there.
I would say that with that submittal date, pretty much verified, then add the 28-day review for completeness, we are just under the 145 days required.
Mr. Czeisla, if it turned out that we were beyond the 145 days, or I have 10 days to issue the decision if I took the whole 10, which I don't usually, but if I did, and if it turned out that was beyond the 145 days, is the applicant rather, willing to grant an extension of the time period to cover that?
Yes, we would be.
Thank you. Okay, and one other question, in trying to find the city's SMP on the website, I don't know that I found the latest and greatest. The last thing I could find, and I'll tell you, the only reason I was checking it was to see if the city had changed it since I heard the permit in 2016. Because obviously, if, as I've suggested, this is essentially the same thing as the 2016 application in all material regards, then if I approved it in 2016, there's no reason I wouldn't approve it now unless there were changes in the law that, or changes in the facts. So I wanted to make sure that I was aware of the latest adopted master program. The latest one I found on the webpage was a page talking about the 2019 update to the master program and a final draft which had red line changes. None of the red line changes affected the Shoreline Conditional Use Permit criteria. So I thought, okay, that's great. Even if they have changed it, apparently they didn't change this. So I guess my question is, what is the current master program? Is it the 2019 one?
It is not. So the 2013 adopted version is the one in place right now. The work in 2018, 2019 was in draft form, never made it to adoption. Then COVID hit, and then a variety of staff turnover. We will investigate later this year those amendments and additional ones to meet our next deadline, but none of those red lines and drafts apply to this. So in essence, the same criteria from 2016 for this dredging proposal is the same criteria.
Right. It makes life easier, at least from my end.
Thank you.
Okay. We can now see if there are any members of the public with us who wish to testify today. Mr. McLean, is your situation there at City Hall the same? You do not have any people with you?
No, there is no one from the public here, Mr. Hearing Examiner.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's see. At least one or two people on the screen who have not testified yet, and I don't know where you are in whether you're a member of the public or a member of the club or a city staffer. There's the second, Eric Lawson rather. Do you wish to testify, sir?
No.
Okay, then thank you. Appreciate that. And there is Mick James. Mr. James, do you wish to testify?
I don't think it's necessary at this point.
Okay, thank you. I think that's everybody. Have I missed anybody? Okay. We would now come to rebuttal. Frankly, I don't know that there's anything for anybody to rebut, but I will ask. Does the applicant wish to present any rebuttal?
No, sir.
Applicant declines. Does city staff wish to present any rebuttal?
We do not. Thank you.
Staff declines. Is there any member of the public who in the last couple of minutes has changed its mind and wishes to offer rebuttal testimony? Record will show there's not. How about closing statements? Does staff want to make a closing statement?
We do. We thank the applicant for their patience. We think this review was thorough. It involved opportunities for public input. It puts them in place to complete their project, and we fully recommend approval.
Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. And does the applicant wish to say any last words?
Just echo the same. Thank you for all the time and effort to get this to a conclusion.
Thank you, Mr. Czeisla. Let's see, my computer clock says it's 10:37. So this will conclude our open record hearing for today. As I indicated at the outset, my decision will be issued in writing, sent to the city, and then the city will distribute it to parties of record. That will definitely happen within the next 10 days. Hopefully much less than that, because that's just the way I like to operate. With that, I'm going to ask our clerk, Mr. McLean, if you would stop the recording.